you see here in the room today is what they're currently working with on the production floor today. And that's why these things are paper, because on some days some of these change depending on what particular production is going on. And as you can see, it's not just Kappa Indonesia, it's Kappa Indonesia grade 3, grade 4, grade this, grade that. You know, it's very specific items that they're coming here. And these are the leaves that they're preparing the day before in Daspario for them to come to this room. And every worker is given a pad of 50 wrappers. Every single SKU in the factory has a specific tobacco that's supposed to be handed to that worker. And that's as simple as it is. I mean, this is our primary gallery. Everything in here is all traditional cigars that's being made. There's not any infused tobaccos on this floor. Okay? The people that are directly behind you right now, this is all T52 production that just started again yesterday. In fact, if you look to your left, you'll see Dirty Rats over here. Now, I know that Mario gave you a very long lecture on how cigars are made. Of course, you pay attention to the rest of you heard so many times. But I'm not going to reiterate how a cigar is made. It's going to be much easier for me to try to point out some differences of what makes the cigars, in my opinion, unique that we make here. I mean, as you can see, the factory is about 50% poly molds versus 50% wood molds. The poly molds, they make a much cleaner product in the long run. They're far more durable. They last a lot longer. You end up getting cigars that are much smoother and consistent in size. But there were a lot of wood molds in the factory before, and it took a while to convince everybody that we had to switch to poly. So what happens is, every single month I bring another 5,000 to 8,000 boxes of poly molds, and we slowly replace the wood molds as they wear out. Eventually, the entire production floor will be poly molds. There's some downsides to poly molds. Poly molds don't wick away any moisture from the barrel of the cigar. So when you press the cigars, rather than getting a 30 minutes between the turns, you ultimately end up having to do about 45 minutes between the turns. Which ends up meaning that instead of an average pair being 12 molds to do production, you're typically need 16 molds to keep the workflow nice and even. So not only do the poly molds cost you more than double the cost, you must have an additional 4 molds per worker. The poly molds run about $100 on average per mold. So every single worker needs to have about $1,600 worth of molds for what they're making on any given day. And obviously you have a lot of other molds given the variety of sizes that you're making. Molds are a huge capital investment. And that's why most factories, they strive very hard to run the wood molds for as long as they possibly can. But the result is as they clean those wood molds, they become damaged, they become sprayed, cigars become lumpy, they become different sizes. 52 grows into a 53, grows into a 54 over time. One of the other things that's very unique is, I know most of you guys have been to Dominican factories. Almost all cigars made in the Dominican. There are some exceptions, like the Leroy Preferidos, like the Opus X. They're entirely hand bunched. But most cigars are made on Lieberman's, a telescope machine. It's like an oversized cigarette rolling machine. I'm not a big fan of that methodology. Yes, you get a more consistent bunch, but what I think is you get a consistent bunch that isn't as good. The other thing I really like you to pay attention to, because this is a big misconception in our business, that whenever you get a little bit of darkness on your lips or a little bit on your fingers, that the materials have been dyed. I want you to look at the hands of the roleros that are working with the dark Maduro wrappers. You get tobacco staining on your fingers. So that alone is not an indication of a dyed wrapper, okay? There's a lot of other ways that you can tell, and I can have that conversation with you in an air-conditioned, quiet place. But I do want you to pay attention, because if you look at the hands of the women, you'll notice that their fingers are stained. Your fingers get stained just from working with tobaccos alone by themselves. Now this is Johnny. Johnny is one of our best poncheros in the factory. Johnny is bunching Liga Privada number 9s. John said something to you earlier about the different methodologies of bunching cigars. There's basically 3 primary methods of doing it. There's a classic Cuban methodology called entubado, which you take the tobacco and you roll it in very, very tight tubes. And you take those individual tubes and then you lay them with a double binder. The thing that's nice about tubing the tobacco is it provides you very good air channels if it's done properly. But the downside to doing entubado, in my opinion, is that when you have one tobacco burning quicker than another tobacco, it tends to cause a nail, a spike, or it tends to cause a tunnel. Because the tobacco being tubed, it's kind of like burning as an island onto itself. And that's one of the downsides, in my opinion, to entubado construction. Another method of construction is kind of an estorado methodology, which is the method that John was referring to as accordion. That's where you take the leaves and you kind of fold them in a back and forward methodology and you lay them into the double binder. That method, you get a more consistent burn, but because the leaves being folded that way, you ultimately don't end up with as good as clean as air channels. So it's very easy to make a cigar that's too tight. It doesn't have the proper airflow in the cigar. There's a third method, which is an incredibly lazy method, which John referred to as booking. That's where you just simply take all the tobacco, you place it in your hand, you fold it in half, you fold all it over in half again. That's just terrible, period. Nobody that knows anything about making cigars should never book a cigar. What we do on Liga Privada and on Underground is we do something that's a hybrid of entubado and estorado. And what we try to do is we try to take the elements of both of those styles and methods of bunching cigars and take what's the best of them and let go of the worst of them. What he is essentially doing is, instead of using the double binder method, he starts with a base leaf in his hand, the seco, that serves as the base. That base he will basically fold in half and then fold back onto itself. That's going to end up as the initial combustion chamber for the bunch. And then what you're going to see him do is he's going to take the tobacco and he's going to tube it. But he's going to tube it in a very lazy way. Very big, open, wide tubes of tobacco. Okay? And then he's going to lay those tubes into the bunch. By having those tubes be much wider than the Cuban method, what it allows to have happen is it allows you to get more of the different tobaccos in contact with each other in the bunch, which helps to improve combustion. But yet, because you're still doing some tubing, it ultimately ends up giving you the air channels that you desire. So it's kind of a hybrid between the two methodologies, and that's what you see him doing now. And then, as you see, by using his hands and the texture, he didn't do much backfilling in that cigar. Sometimes you'll see him do a lot of backfill. It depends on how it feels in his hand as to how much backfill actually has to go into the cigar to get the construction of the barrel the way we want it to be. The only place in the factory where you don't have the pairs together is for Liga Privada number 9. And the reason why is they need to work with these wrappers in a much cooler, less humid environment, or the cigars end up getting peletoso, they end up getting wavy. So the number 9s are bunched out on the factory production floor, and their partner brings the cigars here to his comparable pair, his couple, here into the number 9 room. And we're building another number 9 room right behind the plastic. Ignore the plastic, we've double expanded this space. As you can see, it's too tight in here. And that probably won't be enough space. But all the number 9s, the Connecticut Broadleaf number 1 darks, the cigars, the wrappers applied in this room because of the humidity issues of dealing with that wrapper. Okay. And another thing you'll notice on heavy leaf tobaccos, you notice they work on metal tablets. Because the wooden tablets work better for the lighter tobaccos, but for the dark, heavier tobaccos, the wooden tablets wick away too much moisture from the leaf. So using the metal tablet, and you know how I was saying, look at the women's hands? Look how much staining their hands get off Connecticut Broadleaf number 1 darks. Just water and tobacco. And you can see there's a lot of black gunk that ends up on your hands as a result of working with the leaf. So what we're going to do now is jump through. Good. He's going to hate this. Dave, do me a favor. Let's run them back and do the blending session.